Welcome to a brand new episode of the Spiraling Podcast. I am your host, Jackson Wallace. I got my friend, my buddy, and my pal, Chelsea Casciola with me. Chelsea, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Jackson. How are you?
Hey, you know what? I'm feeling great. We're getting towards the end of the week. Tomorrow is Friday. I know it's not going to be the day that you guys usually see this. We usually upload on Monday, so happy Monday to all of you. Hope you have a great rest of your week. But yeah, anyway, so you guys know Jason's been on a little bit of a hiatus. He hasn't been feeling great as of late, so we've been kind of bouncing around and forth back and forth on our episodes. Chelsea's been very, very kind to go ahead and fill in for us, but we have a guest. Okay, we got a wonderful guest with us. Sammi Beatrice is the CEO of Sammi Beatrice Marketing, the host of Fashion Your Passion podcast. Love that, by the way. That's a cool name. Motivational speaker, and she is still in college. Sammi strives to help entrepreneurs and small businesses become more productive and really let their passion shine through. Additionally, she helps teens and young adults find their passion and create it into something magical. Sammi, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
And we're super excited to have you. Again, guys, I mentioned all this. I feel like a podcast connection, okay, on Facebook. If you guys want to go ahead and sponsor the show, I've been shouting you guys out left and right. But shout out to Podcast Guest Connection. Great place to find guests, great place to network, and just, accumulate some and mess with some brilliant minds over there. So shout out to them. But Sammi, wonderful to have you here as always. I mean, wow, that's a crazy bio. Still in college and doing all this other stuff. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So the podcast was really something that I like. This is why everything started. Everything I do today is from the podcast, because in my senior year of high school, my public speaking teacher gave us a motivational speech assignment. Mm-hmm. And so in order to practice for it, I started recording myself every single day, just sort of on some sort of motivational topic. And then I would post it to SoundCloud, and I called it like 30 Days of Motivation or something like that. Yeah. And then I showed it to my teacher on the day of my speech, and she was like, you need to create this into like a real podcast. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to do that. Mm-hmm. And she's like, no, you have to. And then so over winter break, I sort of researched it, and me being the ambitious person I am, I, went full force into it. I bought a mic from Best Buy, and I just started recording something. My first episode, I recorded 3 times over. It was like 5:30 in the morning when I was doing it. And the third time I was delirious, but you know what? I was like, this is fine. I'm good. Let's just post it. And then
is that a solo show? I'm sorry to interrupt. Is it just
No, you're good. No.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I first started the show, I did like solo, then guest, then solo, then guest.
Gotcha.
Now I've been doing more of like guest interviews. I do solos here and there when I don't have a guest for the week. Mm-hmm. But I try to fill it with guests just because I run out of ideas to say, and there's only so much knowledge I have. And so I think, a lot of it is already on the podcast. And so I like to bring in others, other perspectives and stuff like that. So it's been, I'm like, whenever I feel like talking to the mic, I'll hop on, and do a solo episode. Cool. But yeah, it's been very cool. So, from there, I was like, okay, because I'm from New York, and then for college, I moved to California. And so I was like, okay, I think this is my time to sort of go out and speak, because I knew a lot of like youth motivational speakers from city council conferences that I've gone to when I was in high school. And so I knew a few in California, so they sort of helped me out with like connections and stuff like that. And I started to go out and speak at like little high schools and stuff like that, and different clubs and organizations within my college. And then COVID hit, and I was like, what do I do now? And one of my friends actually reached out to me, and she was like, do you know anyone who's a social media manager? And I was like, I could do that. And then I started doing social media for her. And from there, I spiraled into having 8 clients, and we're just sort of, opened the agency literally 2 weeks ago, because I just was sort of doing it, like very, very hush hush.
Sure.
But I opened the agency fully. I have like 6 interns now, which is beautiful.
Wow.
And we just sort of been going from there. But really, it's funny because when I tell my story, it's like people think, oh my God, everything went so perfectly. But really there was a lot of tears, a lot of confusion, and just like just questioning, is this really what I'm supposed to do? Is this really, what I want to do for the rest of my life? So,
Sure.
and to this day, even like, there are days where I'm just like, I don't feel like doing any of it at all. Like, I just want to quit it all and like do nothing, So
Right.
it's like, it definitely is, sort of a journey for sure.
Definitely. So you mentioned, so you're doing social media, right?
Yeah.
And the manager stuff. What's kind of do you have like a go-to strategy or like a go-to approach when when a new client comes up? Like, what's kind of your process with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, the first thing I'll do is I'll evaluate what they have already. Their content. I'll hop on the phone with them and I'll explain like what their process is.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the times they're like, I try to seek out the ones who like are trying to post on social but like don't really know like what they're doing.
Right.
And so they're like, I'm just trying to do something. I just post things and stuff like that. And then we sort of go over like, what do you want to exactly post? So I'll give an example. So my client, my motivational speaker client who I have right now, she was just sort of like posting, sort of when she went to go speak at schools and when she was, doing like virtual events and stuff like that. And then COVID hit and she was like, I have no idea what to do anymore. And so we decided to do, and then she launched 2 podcasts as well. So we decided to do sort of like Tuesdays her podcast day. So we post a podcast graphic. Then Wednesdays we'll post a quote, and then Thursdays, we'll post a whatchamacallit. We'll post like an inspirational caption from her and with a picture of her. And then Mondays she does her IG lives that get posted to the feed and stuff like that. So just creating that aesthetic and sort of like aesthetic in a sense, and creating sort of some like look that it's like, okay, like this, like if you pop on a page, it's like, okay, like there's similar things going on here, and the color scheme as well is sort of similar. That's sort of where I find that there's most success in growing an Instagram or having people come to your Instagram page.
Yeah, kind of. It's in the minute details, making sure the color scheme is correct. It's something that I've kind of found that too. With some work that I've done with my dad as well, is when we'll talk to clients and we'll say, hey, they're like, hey, we want to do this, this, and this, and like, but I don't understand. I don't know how to post, and to be frank, I'm not the best poster either, right? So I'm not the best one to go to advice for that, but I do understand that it's all in the details, right? Making sure the color scheme is correct, making sure you're doing some of the same stuff. If you kind of post something just to post it, it's not really worth it. So at least that's kind of what I've found from before.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's super interesting that you say that. But you said that you were, there's been some times where it's been rough, right? It's, you're crying. Yeah. You're thinking about quitting. You're thinking about just hanging it all up. So maybe you can kind of go a little, if you feel comfortable with it, go a little deeper into that side of things.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's so important to go into that side of things.
Yeah.
It all really started out when I was 12. So what was that, like 9 years ago? I don't know how to add. Whatever.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah, somewhere around there. And really what happened was I was in track, track and field, and there was 1 week where I just felt really off.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I'll take a week off. It's fine, whatever. But when I came home that week, all I did was sit on the couch until 8 o'clock. And then I was like, crap. I was like, I have homework to do. So I did it from like 8 to 10. And then I went to bed and woke up the next morning at like 7, right before my bus came, and stuff like that. And it never went away. It always stayed with me. And from 7th grade to 8th grade, like I just was in this like, sort of feeling of like, and I quit track, the next year. I just stayed and like, I was like, okay, I'm coming home, watching television, kind of doing my homework, not really doing it, and just sort of going through the motions of like what I have to do.
Yeah.
There's nothing else that I really wanted to do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I became, my whole just like attitude just changed, and I was like, this isn't right. But then again, like I wasn't really close to my parents or anything, so I sort of just stayed the way I was and didn't really tell anyone anything. And then I remember when I got into high school, it was the same thing. It was actually worse because I didn't know anyone when I went into high school. I had maybe 1 or 2 friends, but they weren't the closest. But really, I was a teacher's pet in middle school. So in my final year of middle school, every teacher knew my name. I knew every teacher. We would have conversations all the time. And then again, high school, brand new school, I knew no one. I remember like halfway through the year, I just like couldn't take it. And so I in the middle of class one day, I told my teacher, I was like, hey, can I talk to you outside for a minute? Like we were like doing a worksheet or whatever. She's like, yeah, of course, what's up? And I was like, I feel like I'm drowning. I don't know how to get my head above water.
Wow.
And she was like, are you okay? And I was like, I don't think so. And she like from there, like she was just my go-to person. Like I just sort of, she's like, all right, like we're gonna help you get through this. And I just sort of, talked with her every single day. And, it got a little bit better. I wouldn't say it got, the most, but I think I met some friends that year and everything was fine. And then 10th grade, I finally started going to therapy because I was like, something else to, be done with this. And so I started going there. That therapy freaking changed my life. Like everything, like it just made sense. Like I'm just so happy that I decided to go through with that. And the rest of high school was kind of okay. I mean, I just sort of, did my thing and, whatever. And I think that senior year was really the year that everything sort of changed for me because I remember the first couple of months of senior year, I was the same. I was just anxious all the time. And I was like, I didn't have like a zest for life. I didn't have like, I wasn't like quote unquote happy. I didn't have any joy in my life, and then my public speaking teacher, I know I'm going to bring her up again, but she was like, Sammy, she's like, we need to fix this. Like, this isn't right. And I was like, yeah, I know. Thank you for telling me that. I was like, I know that all along. And she was like, but I want to help you. And I was like, all right, fine. And so like, honestly, like we would have 2-hour conversations all the time about why I was feeling a certain way about, X or Y, just different aspects of my life. And then, one day I came to her crying and I was like, you know what, I'm just so sick of this. Like, I can't keep, stopping and resetting and starting again. And she goes, so why are you? She goes, so just stop it. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, oh, wow. And then from there, like literally the next day, like I went to the gym every single day, like religiously. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning, went to the gym, did sort of a morning routine, practiced gratitude, did all, everything, went to therapy every week, ate, like just cleaned up my diet, did all the things. And I was on cloud 9 from there. Like the last 5-6 months of senior year were the best 6 months of my life, I've really got to say. And then, when I got into college, it got harder again because it was the same routine. It was like, I don't know anyone. I don't know what I'm doing. I changed from the beginning of college till now. I changed my major, 6 times. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what lit me up anymore because I was just following what my high school self, I was trying to get back to that high school version of me where I was so happy and so like elated with everything in my life.
Sure.
Honestly, I could say to this day, like, yes, there have been moments where I've been, super happy and back on everything, but, COVID really hit and then everything just sort of, fired out again. And for me, a big piece of it was that, my grandparents are still in New York. And then actually this past August, my immediate family just moved to California from New York. So
wow, yes, there's some distance there.
Yeah. So my grandparents are still in New York and they're really the only ones who are still in New York. And so it's been hard for me to like have them there and everyone else here. And so they, I think that's been a big piece too for me, like not being able to function the right way and stuff like that. But, I think just leaning into stuff that I'm passionate about, like my work and the internships I have has been really helpful in terms of that. And just, I think moving forward, like just getting more back into gratitude and trying to go back to the gym somehow and stuff like that is really going to be beneficial. But yeah, I mean, it's been a journey for sure. Many ups and downs, but I'm grateful for every single part of it.
Well, I'm super happy that you're grateful. It seems to be doing much better now, which is good, right? Life always has its problems and its own trials and tribulations throughout, the different sections of our life. So I'm curious if we kind of go back to some of your younger years. We were talking about not being very close to their parents. Is that still a thing? Have you gotten closer to them as you've grown? Was that like a big impact for you? Didn't you just not like? And again, if I'm getting too personal, tell me shut up. Like, that's fine. But was that a big part of why you were struggling? With your own sense of happiness or while growing up.
So I'm not really close with them still.
Okay.
Obviously, with college, it's kind of easier not to talk to them as much and stuff like that, because I'm not
Sure.
living in the same roof as them. But even like when I go back home, like, it's just like sort of, the surface level things I chat with them about, like school and, internships and stuff like that. Even like telling them that like I quit an internship like a couple months ago, like it was so hard for me to like say it out loud. I don't even know
Sure.
why. But I think like it's hard because I don't think that it's impacted it too much just because I have been very close with my teachers all my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so like they sort of filled in that role of like parent. I call them my mothers, like they're literally my mothers. So I think
Yeah.
it was, me just like honing in on that and really like leaning on that was the most sort of effective for me in that sense. Obviously, I would love to be close to my parents. It'd be, sort of a dream come true. But I think, obviously, like, and also it's like it's more on me than them. Like they want to, like they're open, but I'm just like hesitant for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, you know, eventually we'll get there. I just think that I'm not, sort of ready to do that yet.
Okay. That's fine. I guess. Yeah. I'm curious. So, what was exactly the feeling? If you could put a one word to kind of describe, I know you're going through some tough times, and you mentioned one word. You mentioned drowning. Is that an accurate statement of like just kind of how you felt when going? Is it just going into a new environment with a new place? Was this just like random occurrences? I'm kind of curious about that feeling and when that was occurring.
Yeah, so that was like I would say 3-4 months into my freshman year of high school.
Okay.
And so at that point, like I was sort of behind in assignments that weren't due until the end of the semester, and I was behind in like, just like people were just throwing tasks at me for my extracurriculars and for this and for that. And I was just like, I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like sort of, like keeping up with them and stuff like that. So that was sort of the drowning piece was like, I had a lot to do, but also I had a lot of like emotions in me and like I couldn't handle all of them, if that makes any
Gotcha.
sense.
Okay.
And I've honestly, after that point, I've felt that feeling many times over,
Yeah.
because things just sort of, I just wake up one morning and I decide that, that like I'm just not feeling so hot. And so I don't do anything. And then the next day it just continues. And then like by, say it's a Monday, by Friday, it's like, oh, I had 85 things to do this week and I did none of them. So then the next week I sort of have to catch up on all of them. And so, it's been a struggle with that for sure, but I'm trying to get better with like, okay, I can sort of be able to sit with myself for one day, not 5 days.
Right.
Luckily, like my depression isn't as severe where like I'm able to like get myself out of bed after like, a day or two. And so that's really helped as well. But I
That's
mean,
good.
it's relative, it's like, it depends on what's going on. It depends on how you're feeling. And like, sometimes like the drowning feeling is just going to be there and you're just going to have to deal with it. And that's really, all you can do with that.
Yeah. So you mentioned therapy helped you out a lot, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's great. I think that the therapy is a really good thing, and it's helpful for a lot of people, and just talking about some of these things can be for me. Whenever I talk about things, like it's almost like manifesting them, and it helps me personally. Just kind of talk it out, and almost like talking to myself in my brain. Seems weird, but it just helps me. But I, I'm curious, what was the best part about therapy for you? What helped you the most? Is there anything that they said? Did they diagnose you with anything or put you on any like medication? I'm just kind of curious, like what helped you?
Yeah. So I have been going to therapy now for 6 years,
Okay.
and just this past September is when I was put on medication.
Okay.
Because it was actually because I wanted to, not because like they told me to.
Mm-hmm.
I started went to a psychiatrist and I explained what was going on, and she's like, yeah, like if you feel like it's gonna help, then we could try it out. So I've been on anxiety meds for what, 6 months now.
Okay.
But when I first started therapy, I didn't know what I was getting into. I was like, okay, I'm just going to go to someone. My aunt and uncle are both social workers. And so I sort of like knew what was going to go on, but I didn't know. But my first therapist, she was okay, not the best, whatever. And then the second one that I went to when I was still in high school, pretty much like changed my life. Like my aunt helped me pick her out and stuff like that. And I think the biggest thing about therapy was that, it sort of, it was the way that my thinking changed about things.
Yeah.
It was the way in which I would say something and she would be like, yes, okay, or no, like let's sort of, change that and think of that in a different way.
Okay.
That way it benefits you or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It was the way that, to be honest, she called me out on things that I was doing that I didn't even know that were, sort of sabotaging for me in a way or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then when I went to college, I didn't go to therapy for for the first semester, because I was like, I'll take a break, whatever. And then second semester, like I just went to therapy religiously. I was like, I need it in my life. I don't know my life without it. It was so much better, with it there. And so that was sort of a big thing for me too. And so I think that, yeah, I just think that the biggest thing was like the way it changed my thinking and the way I just had a better outlook on life after it.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Well, I'm glad it was helpful, and seems to be working. So that's good. It's a good thing. That's a good thing. I think you keep it up, and it's it gets better as time goes on. I think that's something that that's one thing that my brother, he was in therapy for a while. He was really, really scared of storms. It really bugged him. It was kind of like for him, I think it was a sense of not being able to control what was going on. But they just told him they helped him a lot. So I'm a big believer in therapy. So, but anyway, so you got all this stuff going on, right? And you're still in college. I'm kind of move the conversation over to what's going on with you now. I'm glad that you came on and told us your story. I think it's important to talk about mental health and to be aware of it. And it's something that's definitely not talked about enough. And we talked about that a lot on the show. So that's what we're trying to do. And thank you, Chelsea. And Chelsea might have a few thoughts on the topic. Chelsea, you got anything for us?
No, well, I'm a firm believer in breaking the stigma of any kind of mental illness on the spectrum. So, I love getting to be a part of the solution, and I definitely think it's awesome, what you've overcome. And I think that's important. Redemption stories are so important. One of the things that I love that you said, so I used to work in the mental health field for 7 years, predominantly with substance abuse clients, but, coexisting mental illness across the board for sure. And so one of the things that I used to tell my clients is, for people with mental illness, one of the biggest obstacles is what I call the complacency hole, and for me, and I still do it to this day. And I'm self-aware about it, but, I'll start putting things off, okay, I'll do the laundry tomorrow, or I'll do the dishes tomorrow, and little things here and there. And then the next thing I know, I look up and I've dug myself into this huge hole. But when I look up and realize how I've got to get out, well, I've got to do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this to get out of the hole, I get overwhelmed and I'm like, yeah, no, thank you. Like, I'm just going to crawl in a hole. Don't want to deal with it. Instead of just taking a step back and, like you said, shifting my perspective of what I can do in that moment to start getting myself out of that hole. I'm not busy for the next hour, so I can do a load of laundry. I'm not doing anything right this second, so I can take care of this. And after, that momentum continues, I realize I'm out of the hole. So, I'm very passionate about all things mental health, just because there is such a stigma. And I think we as a community have come so far from even when I was a kid, as far as talking about it and talking about the solution. I think that's the most important, because honestly, anywhere on the spectrum that you're dealing with mental illness, whether it's, borderline, bipolar, anxiety, depression, addiction, what works for one is not necessarily going to work for the other, but the common denominator is definitely support, and breaking those stigmas that are attached to each and every one. And I think that's so crucial. I definitely grew up in an environment where it was not discussed very often, and definitely not solution based, in dealing with them, even though it ran rampant in my family and heritage. So I definitely think that it's so important that we do these things and talk about it, and talk about the other parts of it, the good parts of, this is something I deal with, but it's also something I've overcome. And that's the most important, is the hope factor, if you will.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think hope's a beautiful thing. And Chelsea, I'm actually curious, did and in your work with the in the mental health field for that long, I'm wondering, is this and forgive me for my ignorance here with depression, is the common feeling of is it a good word, drowning? Did you hear that a lot while you were working in that field?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, drowning, and like I said, just as much as what works solution based for one person is going to be different across the board, the
Right.
same goes for how it affects people. So, I've definitely heard the terminology drowning. I've heard different verbiages across the board, as far as like an impending doom or just this numb feeling.
Yeah.
It just kind of affects everybody differently, unfortunately. And dealing with particularly substance abuse clients, the coexistence of
Yeah.
depression is fairly common. And so, you add those two components together and they just kind of feed off one another. You feel numb because of the depression, but then you feed the numbness, through the drug and alcohol addiction. So
Yeah.
whatever the verbiage is, it's definitely, a feeling that unless you've experienced it yourself, there's really nowhere to really capture it. And again, we did a recent podcast on suicide prevention.
We did.
And one of the things that we kind of talked about is, you go through these feelings of nobody understands, nobody could get it. If only someone knew what was going through my head, or if only, nobody's ever felt like this. It's a very isolating mental illness to deal with, for sure.
Yeah, and Sammy, I'm wondering, so do you have any like personal strategies or things that you like to do when you know that feeling is coming on, and to kind of help break you out of that feeling, or kind of get the ball rolling? Actually, the first step is always the hardest, right? Like Chelsea was just talking about, building that kind of momentum, getting that little bit of laundry done over here, getting this little bit done, and all of a sudden you start digging yourself out of the hole. I'm wondering what kind of helps you. Maybe that can help some of our listeners that are listening right now, if they can try some of the things that you do.
Yeah, for sure. So if I know it's coming on and it hasn't really like happened yet, I guess you can say,
Yeah.
I'll definitely be more conscious, like how I'm feeling and what's going on, and I'll, surround myself more with like people, and just sort of like get my spirits up in some way, or I'll like, I'll get outside more, take more walks,
Yeah.
listen to good podcasts, like, stuff like that. I'll maybe like clean up somehow, or like, go through some things. Like cleaning's the way that I, like to sort of, feel better about things. But if I'm like in the middle of it and I've sort of, and like just sitting in bed, like, just not knowing what I want to do with myself. I think around like a day or two, I'll like make that conscious decision of like, okay, I'm going to do one thing today. I'm going to go take a shower today, or I'm going to go, brush my teeth today. And then each day after that, add on one more thing, that I could do. So the next day, maybe I'll shower and brush my teeth, or I'll do, I'll do X and Y, or whatever
Sure.
it is. And then some days if I'm really not feeling like up to it, some days I literally just work from my bed. That way, like I am doing something, but also I don't have to leave my bed because I don't feel like it. Does that make sense? And that's like, I mean, for me, that's a good way for me to like not get behind, but also like not have to like feel like, I'm forcing myself to do something. So there's just some little things that I do. Again, like also like I, even on my darkest of days, I still practice gratitude every single day. Like that is a thing that I will never stop doing. I will always continue, whether it's one thing, 10 things, or 5 things that I'm grateful for from the day before, I do it every single day religiously.
I
That's
love
good.
that.
Love that too. Chelsea, I'm curious, you spoke about the stigmas before
Mm-hmm.
that come along with mental health and with depression and anxiety. How do we begin to kind of break those apart?
How much time you got,
So it's
Jackson?
a loaded question, and I know that we have a limited amount of time, but I'm just curious, like with
Yeah.
your expertise too. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I could write a whole book on my thoughts on that, but
Yeah.
I'll simplify it as best as I can. You know, there's so many different, and I'll keep it, as we're talking about depression, I'll kind of keep it simplified to that. But
Okay.
I've heard everything, and one of my biggest things that I did in working in the mental health field was I actually coached parents in how to love their mentally ill child or substance abuse child, because a lot of it comes down to, and I've talked about this before in my own personal story, as well as other podcasts, but I'm so big on education for this reason. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So if you're a person, dealing with depression and you have a loved one that's never experienced depression, if they choose not to educate themselves, the stigma is, well, you can just get out of bed. You can just do this. Like, why can't you be, you're fine. Like, you're just sad. And it's so much more than that. I've had days of depression where I'm smiling to everyone and nobody has an idea, what's really going on in my head. And it becomes one of those days where I'm truly just faking it till I make it to get through the day. So it comes down to, I think the first step in any stigma, and I've said this before, Jackson, and I know I sound like a broken record, and that's fine. I'm
No,
okay
go
with
for
it.
it.
Is, the biggest component of breaking the stigma starts with education.
Yeah.
And I think everyone at some degree is affected by mental illness, as far as whether it be a loved one, a coworker, someone that they work with at the church, whatever it may be. There is someone in your life, whether you know it or not, that is dealing with some sort of mental illness, substance abuse, addiction of any kind. And I think that it would behoove us all to educate ourselves on what that is and what the struggles are. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you can have the empathy factor because, you're not experiencing it yourself, but you can certainly have the sympathy factor and understanding.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge component when we're talking about something as detrimental as depression and bipolar and anxiety. We see the suicide rates, especially after 2020. It's
Yeah.
because people are left to their own devices. We had an entire podcast of talking about what those rates look like. And it's absolutely, and again, it's never going to be a perfect world. But it's definitely something that we can work harder at as a community, as a support system, to lift one another up and to better understand. I think that's really where it starts is the educational factor. And again, it's so much more than just, I feel sad today, or I can't get out of bed today. There's a spiritual component, there's a physical component, there's an emotional component, there's the
Yeah.
mental component that completely just, changes it's truly a chemical imbalance. So let's start there, but it changes the demeanor of the person for that time being.
Gotcha. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. We really could write a book and go for go for days,
I really could.
days and days. Sammy, I'm curious to your thoughts on all that Chelsea just explained. What do you think?
No, I mean she's 100% correct. Like I have a friend who, is sort of struggling with more of the high functioning piece of depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And so, she's able to do certain things, get up every single day, do her homework, go to class, like smile as she walks through the halls, of her dorm building. But at night she cries herself to sleep. She doesn't feel like she's good enough. She feels like she's stupid because she got whatever, like a certain grade on a test or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think that, I'm a big proponent for ending these stigmas too. Like everyone copes with things differently. Everyone, sort of deals with things differently. It looks different for every single person who is on this planet. And I think that, like what Chelsea said is 1,000% correct.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, yeah, Chelsea, she knows her stuff. That one, Chelsea knows what's going on. But
Sometimes depends on the day of the week.
it just kind of depends on what all's going on. So I
Yeah.
feel you. But as we kind of get closer towards wrapping up, I'm curious, Sammy. So before, I'm wondering, how do you balance all of this stuff that you're going on? You got your social media stuff that you got happening. Obviously, you college student. Like what all? How do you balance all of those spinning plates?
So honestly, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
It just sort of just falls into place. No, but I think that my biggest thing is like I try my best to time block things. So for college, I'll try my best to get all my classes either asynchronous, which means that they don't have like a scheduled like Zoom meeting or we don't meet in person or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or all like my like classes that actually do meet, I'll try to get them all on the same day or the same 2 days if I have to. That way I have the rest of the week open to homework, to my, my agency, my internships, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I just like, for me right now, Mondays and Thursday afternoons are school. Tuesdays and Wednesdays are for my agency. Thursdays are for just like client prep and like internship stuff like that. And then Fridays I have off. Because Sundays I do errands and stuff like that.
Sure.
And so that's sort of how I sort of like just make sure I have time for everything. Obviously, today's Thursday morning and I'm on a podcast interview. So like stuff like this is like sort of, whenever I have, an open hour or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But usually that's how my typical week will go.
Very good. Very good. I noticed so I went to your website and I was like, okay, how do I prep for this podcast? Because I like to try and do my homework on especially if oh gosh, podcast guest session is great because usually the guests that you find have some kind of a social media that you can look at, or they have a website. If my guest has a website, I'm set to go. It makes me happy. So super happy that you have yours. What is the best part about being a Hebrew teacher?
Oh. Okay, so it's funny because I started being a Hebrew teacher when I was 12.
Okay.
Because in my synagogue, like I just, I could do that. And I did all throughout high school, like until I left for college, because I thought it was my dream job. I thought I wanted to be a teacher. I thought I wanted to, work in a middle school or elementary school and just like teach kids.
Yeah.
Come to college, I realized that is not what I wanted to do at all. Sort of like I just moved on to something completely different. But I think the most exciting thing for me in that time was, first of all, I'm super passionate about teaching Hebrew. So I had the time of my life just like teaching it and doing all the things, letting them learn the letters and the words and all that fun stuff like that. But also because I started so early on, I started teaching so early on, a lot of the kids who I had my final year, my senior year of high school, I had when I first started. And so seeing that growth from when they were in like first grade to when they were in sixth grade was just so amazing to me. It made me truly smile because it was like, okay, like they're all grown up now. And, obviously they at that time I was 18, they were 12. So it was like, it wasn't that much of a difference. I was still in high school, they were in middle school. And so just the connections were I was really able to become their teacher, but also sort of like their friend in a way. And it was easier for me to sort of, teach them and just like communicate with them. And we just had a lot of fun. So I think that was my most, like, honestly, my favorite part of it all, for sure.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm wondering, and again, if I get too personal, feel free to tell me to hush. So I'm wondering, did teaching Hebrew, did that help you become closer to God, or that give you a little more, bring your spirituality level up a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I have always put my Judaism first. Like, it is something that I will always put first. I have always put first. It's not something that I'm, like, oh, it's just on the back burner. I took a semester abroad to go to Israel my junior year of high school.
Very cool.
I was there for 4 months, and it really just elevated everything that I sort of had known before. I worked actively in the Hillel at my school now. And stuff like that. So it's something that, yes, I think teaching Hebrew was very beneficial for me. But I think that was more of like, I was just passionate about it at the time, so I wanted to do it. I think going to Israel and just like being in my own sort of like, because in high school we still had like religion classes, I guess you can call
Sure.
it. It was more laid back, but it was still like, you know, a religion class. And so I think going to that and going to Israel was really the thing that really just amped up like my spirituality and just being able to have that connection to a community, but also, you know, to God and stuff like that was just really beneficial for me. And going into college has been beneficial for me. So.
Yeah, and Chelsea, I also know that spirituality is it's a big part of your life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I love, Sammy, that you've talked about is gratitude. You know, I have a 5-year-old son, and every night, you know, one of the things that's really important for me is for him to understand like the aspect of having like a true intimate relationship with God, as opposed to, you know, my upbringing was kind of, not knowing that intimacy. And so every night we do what's called a gratitude prayer, where he just kind of list off things that he wants to thank God for that night. And then together we say, thank you, God, for all these things. Amen. And every night it's different. Sometimes he thanks him for boogers and baseball. And some days it's like all of my friends and all the people in the world. So it varies, but you know, that's, you know, has always been an important part of my life, or I shouldn't say always, but within the last decade, but definitely now being a mom, and being able to instill that in him and kind of, you know, you never know who's watching. So having him be able to look up to me in my prayer life and what that looks like for me on a daily regimen, but also how I carry out my life. I listen to a lot of worship music. I listen, you know, and just how I treat people. We do a devotional every night. So like last night, it was talking about if someone hurts you, it doesn't mean to hurt them back. God wants us to pray for them. So we had a discussion about it before school this morning. So little things like that, where it's just an implication in life of, you know, how to live that lifestyle out, not just, you know, walking the walk and talking the talk. So it's a huge, huge part of my life. But I think that gratitude, especially when it comes to mental illness, can definitely switch your perspective in a minute. You know, there's days that work is really hard and my boyfriend's quick to remind me like, hey, you have a job. And I'm like, hey, you right.
Yeah,
Because in today's day and age right now, that's hard to come by. So it's little things like that where, you know, it's an attitude of gratitude and just shifting your perspective to know that it definitely could be way worse than what your circumstance currently is.
for sure. And I know it's been a big part in Jason's like recovery and helps him.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's a big part for you, Chelsea. And I think it can be used as a tool for if you're feeling like you're drowning, Sammy, or if you're feeling like things are just not going your way. For those people that you know have that kind of connection, I think it could be really helpful too. So.
Yeah.
100%.
Definitely a big part. But let's kind of close out here. I'm curious. I saw that you also do some public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Sam, I thought that was really cool. I was wondering, do you have one specific moment that sticks out to you from any public speaking that you've done?
Yeah. Um, so, I hate to go back to it, but
Go for it.
the spring semester of my senior year, I was part of like an internship program, I guess you can call it. So you had to sort of pick an internship, you know, or a place around where like you wanted to have like, you know, a job. So a lot of people picked like, you know, like going to the local vet or like going to like wherever.
Yeah.
But I was like, I just want to do my podcast. And he was like, all right, fine, you can do that. And so I did my podcast for my project. And then we had to present our project at the end of the year. And I was like, since freshman year, I always knew that I wanted to make my internship project, my presentation really, like super big. I wanted to have so many people.
Mm-hmm.
So I literally invited every single person who goes to my high school to come to the auditorium on like a day in April or whatever. And that day I did a live podcast recording. I call it a keynote speech because it technically was, but like in order to incorporate it in my project, I had to call it a live podcast recording. And so it was like 350 people, like
Wow.
teachers, like students, like my family, like so many people were there, filled up almost the entire auditorium. And I just talked about how to find your passion for 45 minutes. And it was literally at that moment, right after I ended that speech, I was like, I want to do this and only this for the rest of my life.
That's very
And I think that was really impactful for me. Not for going from not knowing what I wanted to do when I stepped into high school to leaving high school saying, this is the thing I want to do for the rest of my life.
That's very cool. That's very powerful. It's like a, little light bulb just kind of goes on. I think that's super super cool. Wow, 350 people. That's insane.
Yeah.
So tie it into my last little thing here. It's is that the moment that really truly inspired the Fashion Your Passion podcast? Was it that live recording?
Yeah, so the podcast has already been going for a few months now. Yeah, so that was like episode 10.
Oh,
but
okay. Excuse me.
I had that choice at that moment to either stop the podcast because I had identified my project, so I was good to go, or continue it. And honestly, at that moment, that was the moment where, I was like, I want to continue the podcast and speaking, forever.
Yeah.
Like I never wanted to stop. No, but I'll tell you really quickly, the idea for the Fashion Your Passion podcast was because I started my then dream job at 12, which is Hebrew teaching. And then B, because I wanted to take podcasts that I was listening to, like Rachel Hollis, Ed Milet, Lewis Howes, all those people. And I wanted to change into language that high school and college students would understand, and give them examples on the concepts of like what they would understand. So that's the reason why I launched the podcast for. And Fashion Your Passion just really just like came to be by me and one of my teachers just like throwing around different like synonyms, and then we came up with fashion as a way to like create something.
Yeah.
And then I was like, passion, I want it to be in there. So that's how Fashion Your Passion was born.
Very, very cool. I love the name. I think the speaking is awesome, and Sammy, you have a really cool story, and I'm super happy that you're able to overcome, and able to be an inspiration for other people. Thank you for joining us on the show. Before we kind of wrap up here, I'm wondering, where can everybody find you? Of course, I'm going to have the link to the Fashion Your Passion podcast down in the description below, guys. But where can we find you?
Yeah, so I'm everywhere. Obviously, like you said, the Fashion Your Passion podcast is on every single podcast platform possibly out there. On Instagram, I'm at Sammi Beatrice. So that's SammiBeatrice. Also at Fashion Your Passion podcast. On Twitter, I'm Sammi_Beatrice. And then my website is SammiBeatrice.com.
Very, very cool. Chelsea, do you have anything else before we kind of wrap up?
No, I think you about covered it all. I really appreciate you sharing your story. I think it's awesome. Again, I'm a big believer in the power of hope, and I definitely think that your story conveys that. So I'm excited to see kind of what our viewers think of this episode for sure.
I think they're really going to like you. Got a lot of energy. You got a lot of light. I think you got a really good future ahead of you, Sammy. So thank you for coming on. Chelsea, thank you for joining me on the podcast episode as well. We're going to have to start a petition. I think, I don't know if Jason's going to be able to come back. He might be taking his spot permanently. So, but guys, thank you so much for watching the podcast. Remember, you can find us where all podcasts can be heard. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're everywhere. So look up the Spiraling Podcast and you'll be able to see us. I'm going to link Sammy's stuff, like I said before, down in the description below. Go ahead and check her out. But that's going to do it from us, guys. You guys have a wonderful, happy day, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.